Yesterday, Alan came over to visit with his son, Joey. During the 2 hours that Alan and I were talking, Joey interrupted us constantly, making it impossible to carry on a real conversation. I gave him several picture books for children, but he would barely glance at them before tossing them aside and interrupting our conversation again. He demands the constant attention of grown-ups. Later, Joey put on his jacket and went outside to play with a neighbor's child. I asked Alan, "Do you find family life easy?" Alan didn't answer directly. Then he said, "I've discovered a way to have a lot more time. In the past, I used to look at my time as if it were divided into several parts, but now I consider my time with Joey and Sue my own time. When I help Joey with his homework, I try to find ways of seeing his time as my own time. The same with Sue. The remarkable thing is that now I have unlimited time for myself." Alan smiled as he spoke. I was surprised. I knew that Alan hadn't learned this from reading books. This was something he had discovered for himself in his own daily life. Washing the dishes to wash the dishes. 30 years ago, when I was a novice at Two Heel Pagoda, washing the dishes was hardly a pleasant task. 2 novices had to do all the cooking and washing up for sometimes well over 100 monks. There was no soap. We had only ashes and rice husks. Cleaning bowls was a chore, especially during the winter when the water was freezing cold. Nowadays, one stands in a kitchen equipped with a liquid soap, special scrub pads, and hot running water. Anyone can wash them in a hurry, then sit down and enjoy a cup of tea afterwards. While washing the dishes, one should only be washing the dishes, which means that while washing the dishes, one should be completely aware of the fact that one is washing the dishes. At first glance, that might seem a little silly. Why put so much stress on a simple thing? But that's precisely the point. The fact that I am standing there washing bowls is a wondrous reality. I'm being completely myself, following my breath, conscious of my presence, and conscious of my thoughts and actions. If, while washing dishes, we think only of a cup of tea that awaits us, thus hurrying to get the dishes out of the way as if they were a nuisance, then we are not washing the dishes to wash the dishes. What's more, we are not alive during the time we are washing the dishes. If we can't wash the dishes, the chances are while drinking the cup of tea, we will barely be aware of the cup in our hands. Thus, we are sucked away into the future, and we are incapable of actually living 1 minute of life. I remember a number of years ago, when my friend Jim and I were traveling together in the United States, we sat under a tree and shared a tangerine. Jim began to talk about what we would be doing in the future. Whenever we thought about a project that seemed attractive or inspiring, Jim became so immersed in it that he forgot what he was doing and popped a section of tangerine in his mouth. Then, before he had even begun chewing it, he would have another slice ready. He was hardly aware he was eating a tangerine. I said, "You ought to eat the tangerine section you've already taken." Jim was startled into realizing he hadn't been eating the tangerine at all. He had been eating his future plans. The Sutra of Mindfulness says, when walking, the practitioner must be conscious that he is walking. When sitting, the practitioner must be conscious that he is sitting. When lying down, the practitioner must be conscious that he is lying down. Practicing thus, the practitioner lives in direct and constant mindfulness of the body. The mindfulness of the positions of one's body is not enough, however. We must be conscious of each breath, each movement, every thought and feeling, everything which has any relation to ourselves. But where are we to find the time to practice such mindfulness? Alan said that since he's begun to consider Joey's and Sue's time as his own, he has unlimited time. But perhaps he has it only in principle, because There are doubtless times when Alan forgets to consider Joey's time as his own while going over Joey's homework with him, and thus Alan may lose that time. If he really wants unlimited time, he will have to keep alive the realization that this is my time throughout the time he's studying with Joey. But during such times, one's mind is inevitably distracted by other thoughts. So, if one really wants to keep one's consciousness alive, from now on I'll use the term mindfulness to refer to keeping one's consciousness alive to the present reality, then one must practice in one's daily life, not only during meditation sessions. When you walk along a path leading into a village, you can practice mindfulness by keeping this one thought alive. I'm walking along the path leading into the village. But don't repeat it like a machine over and over. Every day we are engaged in a miracle we don't even recognize, a blue sky, white clouds, green leaves. If we're engaged in mindfulness while walking along the path to the village, then we will consider each step we take an infinite wonder. Sitting. Zen Master Thich says that when sitting in meditation, one should sit upright, giving birth to this thought: sitting here is like sitting on the Bodhi spot. The Bodhi spot is where Lord Buddha sat when he obtained enlightenment. If any person can become a Buddha, and the Buddhas are all those countless persons who have obtained enlightenment, then many have sat on the very spot I sit on now. But active, concerned people don't have time to walk leisurely along paths of green grass or sit beneath trees. One must try to resolve 1,000,000 difficulties. There is hard work to do. You might well ask, then how are we to practice mindfulness? My answer is, keep your attention focused on the work. Be ready to intelligently handle any situation which may arise. This is mindfulness. During the moment when one is dealing with whatever arises, a calm heart and self-control are necessary to obtain good results. If we are not in control of ourselves and instead let our impatience or anger interfere, then our work is no longer of any value. Mindfulness is the miracle by which we master and restore ourselves. It is the miracle by which we call back our dispersed mind and restore it to wholeness so that we can live each minute of life. Taking hold of one's breath. Mindfulness is at the same time a means and an end, the seed and the fruit. When we practice mindfulness in order to build up concentration, mindfulness is a seed. The presence of mindfulness means the presence of life, and therefore mindfulness is also the fruit. Mindfulness frees us of forgetfulness and dispersion and makes it possible to live fully each minute of life. You should know how to breathe to maintain mindfulness, as breathing is a natural and extremely effective tool which can prevent dispersion. Breath is the bridge which connects life to consciousness, which unites your body to your thoughts. Whenever your mind becomes scattered, use your breath as the means to take hold of your mind again. Breathe in lightly, a fairly long breath, conscious of the fact that you are inhaling a deep breath. Now breathe out all the breath in your lungs, remaining conscious the whole time of the exhalation. The Sutra of Mindfulness teaches the method to take hold of one's breath in the following manner. Be ever mindful you breathe in, and mindful you breathe out. Breathing in a long breath, you know, I am breathing in a long breath. Breathing out a long breath, you know, I am breathing out a long breath. Breathing in a short breath, you know, I am breathing in a short breath. Breathing out a short breath, you know, I am breathing out a short breath. Experiencing a whole breath body, I shall breathe in. Thus you train yourself. experiencing the whole breath body. I shall breathe out. Thus you train yourself. Calming the activity of the breath body, I shall breathe in. Thus you train yourself. Calming the activity of the breath body, I shall breathe out. Thus you train yourself. In a Buddhist monastery, everyone learns to use breath as a tool to stop mental dispersion and to build up concentration power. Concentration can help one obtain the Great Awakening. It is autumn, and the golden leaves falling one by one are truly beautiful. Taking a 10-minute walk in the woods, watching my breath and maintaining mindfulness, I feel refreshed and restored. Like that, I can enter into a communion with each leaf. Of course, walking alone on a country path, it is easy to maintain mindfulness. If there's a friend by your side, not talking but also watching his breath, then you can continue to maintain mindfulness without difficulty. But if your friend begins to talk, it becomes a little more difficult. If in your mind you think, I wish this fellow would quit talking, you have already lost your mindfulness. But if you think instead, if he wishes to talk, I will answer, but I will continue in mindfulness, aware of the fact that we are walking along this path together, you will be continuing in mindfulness. Following the length of the breath. The student lies back down on the floor. The stomach rises with the filling of the lungs. At the beginning of the breath, the stomach begins to push out, but after inhaling about 2/3 of the breath, it starts to lower again. Why? Between your chest and stomach there is a muscular membrane, the diaphragm. When you breathe in correctly, air fills the lower part of the lungs first. Before the upper lungs fill with air, the diaphragm pushes down on the stomach, causing the stomach to rise. When you have filled your upper lungs with air, the chest pushes out and causes the stomach to lower again. That is why in former times people spoke of the breath as originating at the navel and terminating at the nostrils. For beginners, lying down to practice breathing is very helpful. The important thing is to guard against making too great an effort, which can be dangerous for the lungs. In the beginning, the practitioner should lie on his or her back on a thin mat or blanket, arms loosely at his or her sides. Don't prop the head on a pillow. Focus your attention on your exhalation and watch how long it is. Measure it slowly by counting in your mind 1, 2, 3. After several times, you will know the length of your breath. Perhaps it is 5. Now, try to extend the exhalation for one more count or 2, so that the exhalation's length becomes 6 or 7. Begin to exhale counting from 1 to 5. When you reach 5, rather than immediately inhaling as before, try to extend the exhalation to 6 or 7. This way, you will empty your lungs of more air. When you have finished exhaling, pause and let your lungs take in fresh air on their own, as much as they want, without making any effort. The inhalation will normally be shorter than the exhalation. Keep a steady count in your mind and measure the length of both. Practice several weeks like this, remaining mindful of all your exhalations and inhalations while lying down. If you have a clock with a loud tick, you can use it to help you keep track of the length of your inhalation and exhalation. Continue to measure your breath while walking, sitting, standing, and especially whenever you're outdoors. While walking, you might use your steps to measure your breath. After a month or so, the difference between the length of your exhalation and inhalation will lessen, gradually evening out until they are of equal measure. If you feel at all tired while practicing, stop at once. But even if you do not feel tired, don't prolong the practice of long, equal breaths beyond short periods of time. 10 to 20 breaths are enough. In order to measure your breath, you can count or use a rhythmic phrase that you like. If the length of your breath is 6, you might use 6 words. My heart is now at peace. A Buddhist might say, I take refuge in the Buddha. For a Christian, it could be, Our Father who art in heaven. When you are walking, each step should correspond to one word. Your breath should be light, even, and flowing, like a thin stream of water running through the sand. Your breath should be so quiet that a person sitting next to you cannot hear it. Each time we find ourselves dispersed, the method of watching the breath should be used. The instant you sit down to meditate, begin watching your breath. At first, breathe normally, gradually letting your breathing slow down until it is quiet, even, and the lengths of the breaths are fairly long. As the Buddhist Sutra of Mindfulness says, breathing in a long breath, I am breathing in a long breath. Breathing out a long breath, the practitioner knows, I am breathing out a long breath. Thus you train yourself, calming the activity of the breath body. I shall breathe out. Thus you train yourself. After about 10 to 20 minutes, your thoughts will have quieted down like a pond on which not even a ripple stirs. Counting your breath. Making your breath calm and even is called the method of following one's breath. If it seems hard at first, you can substitute the method of counting your breath. As you breathe in, count 1 in your mind. And as you breathe out, count 1. Breathe in, count 2. Breathe out, count 2. Continue through 10. Then return to 1 again. This counting is like a string which attaches your mindfulness to your breath. Without mindfulness, however, you will quickly lose count. When the count is lost, simply return to 1. Once you can truly focus your attention on the counts, you can begin to abandon the counting method and concentrate solely on the breath itself. In those moments when you are upset or dispersed and find it difficult to practice mindfulness, return to your breath. Taking hold of your breath is itself mindfulness. Learn to practice breathing in order to regain control of body and mind and to develop concentration and wisdom. Suppose there is a towering wall from the top of which one can see vast distances, but there is no apparent means to climb it. Only a thin piece of thread coming down both sides. Our breath is such a fragile piece of thread, but once we know how to use it, it can become a wondrous tool. Our breath is the bridge from our body to our mind. Many persons and books report that a person who knows how to breathe knows how to build up endless vitality. Breath builds up the lungs, strengthens the blood, and revitalizes every organ in the body. It's been said that proper breathing is more important than food. Years ago, I was extremely ill. After several years of taking medicine and undergoing medical treatment, my condition was unimproved. So I turned to the method of breathing, and thanks to that, was able to heal myself. Breath is a tool which may help one obtain immense benefits, but these benefits are only the byproducts of the realization of mindfulness. In my meditation class for non-Vietnamese, there are many young people. I've told them that if they can meditate an hour each day, that's good, but it's nowhere near enough. You've got to practice meditation when you walk, stand, lie down, sit and work, talk to friends, or whatever you do. Chopping wood is meditation. Carrying water is meditation. Be mindful 24 hours a day. A day of mindfulness. Every day and every hour, one should practice mindfulness. That's easy to say, but to carry it out in practice is not. That's why I suggest each person try to reserve one day of the week to devote entirely to the practice of mindfulness. If you choose Saturday, then Saturday must be the day during which you are completely master. Whatever the day chosen, consider it your day of mindfulness. To set up a day of mindfulness, remind yourself at the moment of waking that this is your day of mindfulness. You might hang a piece of paper with the word mindfulness on your wall, or a pine branch or anything else that will remind you as you open your eyes that today is your day. Remembering that, perhaps you can feel a smile which affirms that you are in complete mindfulness. While still lying in bed, begin slowly to follow your breath. Slow, long, conscious breaths. Then slowly rise from bed, nourishing mindfulness with your every motion. Once up, brush your teeth, wash your face, and do all your morning activities in a calm and relaxing way. Each movement done in mindfulness. Follow your breath. Take hold of it, and don't let your thoughts scatter. Measure your steps with quiet, long breaths. Maintain a half smile. Spend at least a half hour taking a bath. Bathe slowly and mindfully, so that by the time you have finished, you feel light and refreshed. Afterwards, you might do household work. Whatever your tasks, resolve to do each job slowly, in a relaxed way, with all your attention. Otherwise, your day of mindfulness will be of no value. For those just beginning to practice, it is best to maintain a spirit of silence throughout the day of mindfulness. That doesn't mean you shouldn't speak at all, but if you do talk or sing for that matter, do it in complete mindfulness and keep it to a minimum. Be warned that it is much easier when singing or talking to stray from mindfulness if your meditation strength is still weak. At lunchtime, prepare a meal for yourself. Cook the meal and wash the dishes in mindfulness. In the morning, after you have cleaned your house, and in the afternoon, after you have worked in the garden or watched clouds or gathered flowers, prepare a pot of tea to sit and drink in mindfulness. Allow yourself a good length of time to do this. Don't drink your tea like someone who gulps down a cup of coffee during a work break. Drink your tea slowly and reverently, as if it is the axis on which the whole earth revolves. In the evening, you might read scriptures, write letters to friends, or do anything else you enjoy outside of your normal duties during the week. But whatever you do it in mindfulness. Eat only a little for the evening meal. Later, around 10 or 11 o'clock, as you sit in meditation, you will be able to sit more easily on an empty stomach. Afterwards, you might take a slow walk in the fresh night air, following your breath in mindfulness and measuring the length of your breaths by your steps. Finally, return to your room and sleep in mindfulness. After only 3 months of observing such a day of mindfulness once a week, I know that you will see a significant change in your life. The day of mindfulness will begin to penetrate the other days of the week, enabling you to eventually live 7 days a week in mindfulness. Why meditate? Because a night of sleep doesn't provide total rest. Twisting and turning, the facial muscles tense, all the while dreaming, hardly rest. Lying on your back, with your arms and legs straight but not stiff, your head unsupported by a pillow, this is a good position to relax and to practice breathing. But it is also easy to fall asleep. You cannot go as far in meditation lying down as by sitting. Among our workers in Vietnam, there are many who can sit in the lotus position, the left foot placed on the right thigh and the right foot placed on the left thigh. Others can sit in the half lotus. If one sits in the lotus or half lotus position, It is necessary to use a cushion to sit on so that both knees touch the floor. The 3 points of bodily contact with the floor created by this position provide an extremely stable position. Anyone can learn to sit in the half lotus, though at the beginning it may be somewhat painful. During the initial period, when the pain can be bothersome, alternate the position of the legs or change to another sitting position. In our meditation class in Paris, there are people who do not feel comfortable in either of the above 2 positions, and so I have shown them how to sit in the Japanese manner, the knees bent, resting on their 2 legs. By placing a pillow beneath one's feet, it is possible to sit that way for more than an hour and a half. Keep your back straight. This is very important. The neck and head should be aligned with the spinal column. They should be straight, but not stiff or wood-like. Keep your eyes focused a yard or 2 in front of you. Now, relax all of your muscles and begin to follow your breath. Concentrate on keeping your spinal column straight. Let go of everything else. If you want to relax the worry-tightened muscles in your face, half smile. The longer the half smile is maintained, the better. It is the same smile you see on the face of the Buddha. Place your left hand, palm side up, in your right palm. Let all the muscles in your hands, fingers, arms, and legs relax. Hold on to nothing but your breath and the half smile. For beginners, it is better to sit no longer than 20 or 30 minutes. During that time, you can readily obtain total rest. The technique for obtaining this rest lies in 2 things: watching your breath and letting go. After about 15 minutes or so, it is possible to reach a deep quiet, filled with inner peace and joy. Maintain this quiet and peace. Some people look on meditation as a toil and want the time to pass quickly. Such persons do not know how to sit yet. If you sit correctly, it is possible to find total relaxation and peace while sitting. Often it helps to imagine yourself as a pebble which has been thrown into a river. The pebble sinks through the water effortlessly. Detached from everything, it falls, finally reaching the bottom, the point of perfect rest. You are like a pebble which has let itself fall into the river. At the center of your being is your breath. If you cannot find joy in the peace of sitting, then the future itself will only flow by as a river flows by. You will be incapable of living the future when it has become the present. Joy and peace are possible in this very hour of sitting. If you cannot find it here, you won't find it anywhere. Don't run after your thoughts. Find joy and peace in this very moment. This is your own time. This spot where you sit is your own spot. It is on this very spot and in this very moment that you can become enlightened. Practice like this for a few months, and you will begin to know a profound and renewing delight. The ease of sitting depends on whether you practice mindfulness a little or a lot each day, and it depends on whether or not you sit regularly. Whenever possible, join with friends or relatives and organize an hour of sitting each night. Someone might well ask, is relaxation the only goal of meditation? In fact, the goal of meditation goes much deeper than that. While relaxation is a necessary point of departure, once one has realized relaxation, it is possible to realize a tranquil heart and a clear mind. This is to have gone far along the path of meditation. Of course, to take hold of our minds and calm our thoughts, we must also practice mindfulness of our feelings and perceptions. To take hold of your mind, you must practice mindfulness of the mind. The Zen master Tuan Kyi wrote, "If the practitioner knows his own mind clearly, he will obtain results with little effort. But if he does not know anything about his own mind, all of his effort will be wasted." If you want to know your own mind, there is only one way: to observe and recognize everything about it. This must be done at all times, during your day-to-day life, no less than during the hour of meditation. During meditation, various feelings and thoughts may arise. If you don't practice mindfulness of the breath, these thoughts will soon lure you away from mindfulness. But the breath isn't simply a means by which to chase away such thoughts and feelings. Breath remains the vehicle to unite body and mind. When a feeling or thought arises, your intention should not be to chase it away, but to simply acknowledge its presence. For example, when a feeling of sadness arises, recognize it. A feeling of sadness has just arisen in me. If the feeling of sadness continues, continue to recognize it. A feeling of sadness is still in me. While practicing mindfulness, don't be dominated by the distinction between good and evil, thus creating a battle within yourself. When a wholesome thought arises, acknowledge it. A wholesome thought has just arisen. If an unwholesome thought arises, acknowledge it as well. Don't dwell on it or try to get rid of it, however much you don't like it. To acknowledge it is enough. If letting go of a feeling seems difficult, meditate on a fixed object, using your own state of mind as the meditation subject. The essential thing is to not let any feeling or thought arise without recognizing it, like a palace guard aware of each face passing through the gates. If there are no feelings or thoughts present, then recognize that there are no feelings or thoughts present. Practice like this to become mindful of your feelings and thoughts. When I mentioned the guard at the gate, perhaps you imagined an entrance and an exit with your mind as the guard. This image has one shortcoming. It suggests that those who enter and exit are different from the guard. In fact, our thoughts and feelings are us. When we are angry, we ourselves are anger. When we are happy, we ourselves are happiness. We are both the guard and the visitor at the same time. Therefore, the important thing is to be aware of the thought. Mind can only observe itself. In the Sutra of Mindfulness, Buddha uses the phrasing, mindfulness of feeling in feeling, mindfulness of mind in mind. Mindfulness of feeling in feeling is not contemplation of some image of feeling. Mindfulness of feeling in feeling is the mind experiencing mindfulness of the mind in the mind. The mind is like a monkey swinging from branch to branch through a forest, says the sutra. In order to not lose sight of the monkey by some sudden movement, we must watch the monkey constantly and become one with it. Mind contemplating mind is like an object and its shadow. The two are one. The sutra sometimes uses the expression, bind the monkey, to refer to taking hold of the mind. Once the mind is directly and continually aware of itself, it is no longer like a monkey. There are not two minds, one which swings from branch to branch and another which follows after to bind it with a piece of rope. The person who practices meditation usually hopes to see into his or her own nature in order to obtain awakening. But if you are just beginning, don't wait to see into your own nature. Better yet, don't wait for anything. Especially don't wait to see the Buddha or any version of ultimate reality while you're sitting. In the first 6 months, try only to build up your power of concentration, to create an inner calmness and serene joy. You will shake off anxiety, enjoy total rest, and quiet your mind. You will be refreshed and gain a broader, clearer view of things, and deepen and strengthen the love in yourself. and you will be able to respond more helpfully to all around you. When mind has taken hold of mind, deluded mind becomes true mind. True mind is our real self, is the Buddha, the pure oneness. The 5 aggregates. While you sit in meditation after having taken hold of your mind, you can direct your concentration to contemplate the interdependent nature of certain objects. Recall a simple and ancient truth. The subject of knowledge cannot exist independently from the object of knowledge. To see is to see something. Thinking is to think about something. When the object of knowledge is not present, there can be no subject of knowledge. When we practice mindfulness of breath, then the knowledge of breath is mind. When we practice mindfulness of the body, then the knowledge of body is mind. When we practice mindfulness of objects outside ourselves, then the knowledge of these objects is also mind. Therefore, the contemplation of the nature of interdependence of all objects is also the contemplation of the mind. Every object of the mind is itself mind. In Buddhism, we call the objects of mind the dharmas. Dharmas are usually grouped into 5 categories. 1. Bodily and physical forms. 2. Feelings. 3. Perceptions. 4. Mental functionings. 5. Consciousness. These 5 categories are called the 5 aggregates. The 5th category, consciousness, however, contains all the other categories and is the basis of their existence. Contemplation or interdependence means looking deeply into all dharmas in order to pierce through to their real nature, to see them as part of the great indivisible body of reality. The first object of contemplation is our own person, the assembly of the 5 aggregates in ourselves. Contemplate here and now on the 5 aggregates which make up yourself. You are conscious of the presence of bodily form, feeling, perception, mental functionings, and consciousness. You observe these objects until you see that each of them has an intimate connection with the world outside yourself. If the world did not exist, then the assembly of the 5 aggregates could not exist either. Consider the example of a table. The table's existence is possible due to the existence of things we might call the non-table world, the forest where the wood grew and was cut, the carpenter, the iron ore which became the nails and screws, the parents and ancestors of the carpenter, and the sun and rain which made it possible for the trees to grow. If you grasp the table's reality, then you see that in the table itself are present all those things which we normally think of as the non-table world. If you took away any of those non-table elements and returned them to their sources, the wood to the forest, or the carpenter to his parents, the table would no longer exist. A person who looks at the table and can see the universe is a person who can see the way. Meditate on the assembly of the 5 aggregates in yourself in the same manner until you are able to see the presence of the reality of oneness in yourself and can see that your own life and the life of the universe are one. If the 5 aggregates return to their sources, the self no longer exists. The assembly of the 5 aggregates plays a crucial role in the formation, creation, and destruction of all things in the universe. People normally cut reality into compartments and so are unable to see the interdependence of all phenomena. To see one in all and all in one is to break through the great barrier which Buddhism calls attachment to the false view of self. Attachment to the false view of self means belief in the presence of unchanging entities which exist on their own. When the Bodhisattva Kwan Te Am saw into the reality of the five aggregates giving rise to emptiness of self, she was liberated from every suffering, pain, doubt, and anger. The same would apply to everyone. If we diligently contemplate the five aggregates, we too will be liberated from suffering, fear, and dread. In our lives are present a multitude of phenomena, just as we ourselves are present in many different phenomena. We are life, and life is limitless. The suffering of others is our own suffering, and the happiness of others is our own happiness. If our lives have no limits, the assembly of the five aggregates which makes up our self also has no limits. The impermanent character of the universe, the successes and failures of life, can no longer manipulate us. Having seen the reality of interdependence and entered deeply into its reality, nothing can oppress you any longer. You are liberated. Sit in the lotus position, observe your breath, and ask one who has died for others. Meditation on interdependence is to be practiced constantly, not only while sitting, but as an integral part of our involvement with all ordinary tasks. We must learn to see that the person in front of us is ourself, and that we are that person. We must be able to see the process of inter-origination and interdependence of all events, both those which are happening and those which will happen. I cannot leave out the problem of life and death. Many people serve others and labor for peace through their love for all who are suffering. They are mindful of the fact that the most important question is the question of life and death, often not realizing that life and death are but two faces of one reality. Once we realize that, we will have the courage to encounter both of them. When I was only 19 years old, I was assigned by an older monk to meditate on the image of a corpse in the cemetery. But I found it very hard to take and resisted the meditation. Since then, I have seen many young soldiers lying motionless beside one another, some only 13, 14, and 15 years old. They had no preparation or readiness for death. Now I see that if one doesn't know how to die, one can hardly know how to live, because death is a part of life. We must look death in the face, recognize it and accept it, just as we look and accept life. The Buddhist Sutra on Mindfulness speaks about the meditation on the corpse. Meditate on the decomposition of the body, how the body bloats and turns violet, how it is eaten by worms until only bits of blood and flesh still cling to the bones. Meditate up to the point where only white bones remain, which in turn are slowly worn away and turn into dust. Meditate knowing that your own body will undergo the same process. Meditate on the corpse until you are calm and at peace, until your mind and heart are light and tranquil, and a smile appears on your face. Thus, by overcoming revulsion and fear, life will be seen as infinitely precious, every second of it worth living. And it is not just our own lives that are recognized as precious, but the lives of every other being, every other reality. The Sutra says that the Bodhisattvas who have seen into the reality of interdependence have broken through all narrow views and have been able to enter birth and death as a person takes a ride in a small boat without being drowned by the waves of birth and death. I've spoken about the contemplation of interdependence, The meditation on interdependence is intended to remove false barriers of discrimination so one can enter into the universal harmony of life. It is not intended to produce a philosophical system. According to our tradition, reality has three natures: imagination, interdependence, and the nature of ultimate perfection. Generally, we cloak reality with a veil of false views and opinions. This is seeing reality through imagination. In order to break through, the practitioner meditates on the nature of interdependence, or the interrelatedness of phenomena in the processes of creation and destruction. The meditation on interdependence is to help one penetrate reality in order to be one with it, not to become caught up in philosophical opinion. The raft is used to cross the river. It isn't to be carried around on your shoulders. Finally, one proceeds to the nature of ultimate perfection, reality freed from all false views produced by the imagination. Our teaching speaks of the three non-natures to prevent the individual from becoming caught up in doctrine. When reality is perceived in its nature of ultimate perfection, the practitioner has reached a level of wisdom called non-discrimination mind, a wondrous communion in which there is no longer any distinction made between subject and object. Any one of us, by practicing even a little, can taste of this. I have a pile of orphan applications for sponsorship on my desk. I translate a few each day. Before I begin to translate a sheet, I look into the eyes of the child in the photograph. I feel a deep link between myself and each child, which allows me to enter a special communion with them. I no longer see an I who translates the sheets to help each child. These are moments of non-discrimination mind. When reality is experienced in its nature of ultimate perfection, an almond tree that may be in your front yard reveals its nature in perfect wholeness. If your heart is not clouded by false views, you will be able to enter into a natural communion with the tree. The almond tree will be ready to reveal itself to you in complete wholeness. To see the almond tree is to see the way. When your mind is liberated, your heart floods with compassion for yourself for having undergone countless sufferings because you were not yet able to release false views, and with compassion for others because they do not yet see and continue to create suffering for themselves and others. Now you look at yourself and others with the eyes of compassion, like a saint whose voice is the voice of every person who has seen reality in perfect wholeness. Practice looking at all beings with the eyes of compassion. This is the meditation called the meditation on compassion. This meditation must be realized during every moment you carry out service for others. No matter where you go or where you sit, remember the sacred call. Look at all beings with the eyes of compassion. Sitting in mindfulness, both our bodies and minds can be at peace and totally relaxed. But this state of peace and relaxation differs fundamentally from the lazy, semi-conscious state of mind one gets while resting and dozing. In mindfulness, one is not only restful and happy, but alert and awake. Meditation is not evasion. It is a serene encounter with reality. Be as awake as a person walking on high stilts. Only with this kind of vigilance can you realize total awakening. The Buddha once said that the problem of life and death is itself the problem of mindfulness. Whether or not one is alive depends on whether or not one is mindful. In the Samyutta Nikaya Sutra, the Buddha tells a story which took place in a small village. A famous dancer had just come to the village, and the people were swarming the streets to catch a glimpse of her. At that same moment, a condemned criminal was obliged to cross the village carrying a bowl of oil filled to the brim. He had to concentrate with all his might on keeping the bowl steady, for if even one drop of oil were to spill, the soldier behind him had orders to take out his sword and cut off the man's head. Having reached this point in the story, Gautama Buddha asked, "Now, do you think our prisoner was able to keep all his attention so focused on the bowl of oil that his mind did not stray to steal a glimpse of the famous dancer in town?" Another time, the Buddha recounted a story which made me see the supreme importance of practicing mindfulness over one's own self. There once were two acrobats, a poor teacher and a small girl named Maida. They performed in the streets using a tall bamboo pole. The teacher balanced the pole on his head while the little girl slowly climbed to the top. There she remained while the teacher continued to walk along the ground. Both of them had to devote all their attention to maintaining perfect balance. One day the teacher said, "Listen, Maida, I will watch you and you watch me, so that we can help each other maintain concentration and balance and prevent an accident. Then we'll be sure to earn enough to eat." But the little girl was wise and answered, "Dear teacher, I think it would be better for each of us to watch ourselves." To look after oneself means to look after both of us, the Buddha said. The child spoke correctly. In peace-serving communities, we must follow the same principle. Don't worry if those around you aren't doing their best. Just worry about how to make yourself worthy. Doing your best is the surest way to remind those around you to do their best. I was just invited downstairs for a cup of tea, where a friend has a piano. As Kirsten, who is from Holland, poured the tea, I asked if she would play the piano for me. Kirsten was glad to put down her work for a moment and sat down at the piano to play Chopin. The piece has several measures which are soft and melodic, but others which are loud and quick. Her dog was lying beneath the table, and when the music became excited, it began to bark and whine. Kirsten continued to play while trying to console the dog at the same time, but to no avail. She finished and began to play a piece by Mozart, which was light and harmonious. Now the dog lay peacefully. When Kirsten had finished, she sat down beside me and said, "Often when I play a piece of Chopin the least bit loud, the dog comes up and grabs hold of my pants leg, trying to force me to stop. But whenever I play Mozart, she is peaceful." Kirsten mentioned a report that in Canada people tried playing Mozart for their plants during the night. The plants grew more quickly than normal, and the flowers inclined toward the music. As Kirsten spoke, I thought about conference rooms where people argue and debate. If one placed flowers and plants in such rooms, chances are they would cease to grow. I thought about the garden tended by a monk living in mindfulness. His flowers are always fresh and green, nourished by the peace and joy which flow from his mindfulness. One of the ancients said, "When a great master is born, the water in the rivers turns clearer, and the plants grow greener." We ought to listen to music or sit and practice breathing at the beginning of every meeting or discussion. Let me tell a short story of Tolstoy's, the story of the Emperor's 3 questions. One day, a certain emperor decided if he knew the answers to 3 questions, he would never stray in any matter. What is the best time to do each thing? Who are the most important people to work with? What is the most important thing to do at all times? The emperor issued a decree throughout his kingdom announcing that whoever could answer the questions would receive a great reward. Many made their way to the palace, each person with a different answer. In reply to the first question, one person advised that the emperor make up a thorough time schedule, consecrating every hour, day, month, and year for certain tasks, and then follow the schedule to the letter. Another person replied that it was impossible to plan in advance, and that the emperor should put all vain amusements aside and remain attentive to everything in order to know what to do at what time. Someone else insisted that, by himself, the emperor could never hope to have all the foresight necessary to decide when to do each task, and that he should set up a council of the wise and act according to their advice. Someone else said that if he wanted to know in advance what was going to happen, he should consult magicians and soothsayers. The responses to the second question also lacked accord. One person said that the emperor needed to place all his trust in administrators. Another urged reliance on priests and monks, while others recommended physicians. Still others put their faith in warriors. The third question drew a similar variety of answers. Some said science was the most important pursuit. Others insisted on religion. Yet others claimed the most important thing was military skill. The emperor was not pleased with any of the answers, and no reward was given. After several nights of reflection, the emperor resolved to visit a hermit who was said to be an enlightened man. The hermit was known to receive only the poor, so the emperor disguised himself as a simple peasant and ordered his attendants to wait for him at the foot of the hermit's mountain while he climbed the slope alone. Reaching the holy man's dwelling place, the emperor found the hermit digging a garden. When the hermit saw the stranger, he nodded his head in greeting and continued to dig. The labor was obviously hard on him. He was an old man, and each time he thrust his spade into the ground to turn the earth, he heaved heavily. The emperor approached and said, "I have come here to ask your help with 3 questions. When is the best time to do each thing? Who are the most important people to work with? What is the most important thing to do at all times?" The hermit listened attentively, but only patted the emperor on the shoulder and continued digging. The emperor said, "You must be tired. Here, let me give you a hand with that." The hermit thanked him, handed the emperor the spade, and then sat down to rest. After he had dug 2 rows, the emperor stopped and turned to the hermit and repeated his 3 questions. The hermit still did not answer, but instead stood up and pointed to the spade and said, "Why don't you rest now? I can take over again." But the emperor continued to dig. 1 hour passed, then 2. Finally, the sun began to set behind the mountain. The emperor put down the spade and said to the hermit, "I came here to ask if you could answer my 3 questions. But if you can't give me any answer, please let me know so that I can get on my way home." The hermit lifted his head and asked the emperor, "Do you hear someone running over there?" The emperor turned his head. They both saw a man with a long white beard emerge from the woods, pressing his hands against a bloody wound in his stomach. The man ran toward the emperor before falling unconscious to the ground. Opening the man's clothing, the emperor and hermit saw that the man had received a deep gash. The emperor cleaned the wound thoroughly and then used his own shirt to bandage it. The wounded man regained consciousness and asked for a drink of water. The emperor ran down to the stream and brought back a jug of fresh water. Meanwhile, the sun had disappeared. The hermit gave the emperor a hand, carrying the man into the hermit's hut, where they laid him down on the bed. The man closed his eyes and lay quietly. The emperor was worn out from a long day of climbing the mountain and digging the garden. Leaning against the doorway, he fell asleep. When he awoke, the sun had already risen over the mountain. For a moment he forgot where he was. He looked over to the bed and saw the wounded man also looking around him in confusion. When he saw the emperor, he stared at him intently and then said in a faint whisper, "Please, forgive me." "But what have you done that I should forgive you?" the emperor asked. "You do not know me, Your Majesty, but I was your sworn enemy, and I had vowed to take vengeance on you. I resolved to surprise you on your way back down the mountain and kill you. But after waiting a long time, there was no sign of you. So I left my ambush in order to seek you out. I came across your attendants, who gave me this wound. Luckily, I escaped and ran here. If I hadn't met you, I would surely be dead by now. I had intended to kill you, but instead, you saved my life. I am ashamed and grateful beyond words. Please, grant me your forgiveness." The emperor was overjoyed to see that he was so easily reconciled with a former enemy. He not only forgave the man, but promised to return all the man's property. After ordering his attendants to take the man home, the emperor found the hermit sowing seeds in the earth that they had dug the day before. The emperor repeated his 3 questions one last time. The hermit looked up at the emperor. "But your questions have already been answered." "How's that?" the emperor asked, puzzled. "Yesterday, if you had not taken pity on my age and given me a hand digging these beds, you would have been attacked by that man on your way home. Therefore, the most important time was the time you were digging in the beds. The most important person was myself, and the most important pursuit was to help me. Later, when the wounded man ran up here, the most important time was the time you spent dressing his wound. For if you had not cared for him, he would have died, and you would have lost the chance to be reconciled with him. Likewise, he was the most important person, and the most important pursuit was taking care of his wound. Remember that there is only one important time, and that is now. The present moment is the only time over which we have dominion. The most important person is always the person you are with. For who knows if you will have dealings with any other person in the future? The most important pursuit is making the person standing at your side happy, for that alone is the pursuit of life. Tolstoy's story is like a story out of Scripture. We talk about service to humanity, but often we forget that it is the very people around us that we must live for first of all. If you cannot serve your wife or husband or child or parent, how are you going to serve society? How can we live in the present moment, helping to lessen the suffering of the people around us? The answer to this: we must practice mindfulness. Contemplation of Thought, from Siksasamukaya, translated from the Sanskrit by Edward Conze. He searches all around for his thought. But what thought? It is either passionate, or hateful, or confused. Thought, kaspaya, is immaterial, invisible, non-resisting, inconceivable, unsupported, and homeless. Thought has never been seen by any of the Buddhas, nor do they see it, nor will they see it. A thought is like the stream of a river without any staying power. As soon as it is produced, it breaks up and disappears. Searching for thought all round, he does not see it within or without. Unable to see thought, he seeks to find the trend of thought, and asks himself, whence is the genesis of thought? And it occurs to him that where there is an object, there thought arises. Is then the thought one thing and the object another? No. If the object were one thing and the thought another, then there would be a double state of thought. So the object itself is just thought. Can then thought review thought? No. As the blade of a sword cannot cut itself, so a thought cannot see itself. Thought proceeds without any staying power, like the wind. It ranges far, bodiless, easily changing. The stability of thought, its one-pointedness, its undistraughtness, its non-distraction, is, on the other hand, called mindfulness. Not dwelling on the non-conditioned. From the Vimala Kirti Nirdesa Sutra. Translated from the Chinese by Hanh. What does it mean, not dwelling on the non-conditioned? A bodhisattva contemplates the reality of emptiness, but does not take emptiness as an object of attainment. He meditates on the truth of impermanence, but does not abandon his work to serve and save. He meditates on suffering, but does not reject the world of births and deaths. He meditates on detachment, but goes on realizing good things in the world. He meditates on the homeless nature of dharmas, but continues to orient himself toward the good. He meditates on the reality of neither creation nor destruction, but still undertakes the responsibility in the world of creations and destructions. He meditates on the reality of the ultimate, but still dwells in the world of interdependent origins. He meditates on non-action, but continues always his acts of service and education. He meditates on the position of the true Dharma, but does not follow a rigid path. He meditates on the unreal, impermanent, and non-possessed nature of dharmas, but does not abandon his career concerning merits, concentration, and wisdom. Practicing in that way, the bodhisattva is described as not dwelling on the non-conditioned. He has wisdom but does not end his action in the realm of the conditioned. He wants to realize his great vow, but he will not abandon the conditioned world. The heart of the Prajna Paramita, translated from the Chinese by Hanh. The Bodhisattva Avakulita, while moving in the deep course of perfect wisdom, shed light on the 5 aggregates and found them equally empty. After this penetration, he overcame all pain. In emptiness there is neither form, nor feeling, nor perception, nor mental functioning, nor consciousness, no interdependent origins, no suffering, no extinction, no path, no wisdom, no attainment. Because there is no attainment, the Bodhisattva, basing on the perfection of wisdom, finds no obstacles for his mind. Having no obstacles, he overcomes fear, liberating himself forever from illusion and realizing perfect nirvana. All Buddhas in the past, present, and future, thanks to this perfect wisdom, arrive at full, right, and universal enlightenment. A mantra of prajna paramita should therefore be proclaimed. It is this: gone, gone, gone to the other shore, gone together to the other shore. O awakening, all hail. Exercises in mindfulness. Here are a number of meditation exercises which I often have used. Select the ones you like best. Although these exercises are relatively easy, they form the foundation upon which everything else is built. Half smile when you first wake up in the morning. Hang a sign or symbol such as a branch or the word "smile" on your wall so that you see it when you first wake up. This will serve as your reminder. Use the seconds before you get out of bed to take hold of your breath. Inhale and exhale 3 breaths gently while maintaining the half smile. Follow your breaths. Half smile during your free moments. Anywhere you find yourself sitting or standing, half smile. Look at a child, a leaf, a painting on the wall, anything which is relatively still, and smile. Inhale and exhale quietly 3 times. Maintain the half smile and consider the spot of your attention as your own true nature. Half smile while listening to music. Listen to a piece of music for 2 or 3 minutes. Pay attention to the words, music, rhythm, and sentiments. Smile while watching your inhalations and exhalations. Half smile when irritated. When you realize you're irritated, half smile at once. Inhale and exhale quietly, maintaining the half smile for 3 breaths. Letting go in a lying down position. Lie on your back on a flat surface without a mattress or pillow. Keep your arms loosely by your sides and your legs slightly apart, stretched out before you. Maintain a half smile. Breathe in and out gently, keeping your attention focused on your breath. Relax each muscle of your body as though it were sinking down through the floor. Let go entirely, keeping your attention only on your breath and half smile. Think of yourself as a cat relaxed before a warm fire, whose muscles yield without resistance to anyone's touch. Continue for 15 breaths. Letting go in the sitting position. Sit in the half or full lotus, or cross-legged, or your 2 legs folded beneath you, or even on a chair, your 2 feet touching the floor. Half smile. Inhale and exhale while maintaining the half smile. Let go. Deep breathing. Lie on your back. Breathe evenly and gently, focusing your attention on the movement of your stomach. As you begin to breathe in, allow your stomach to rise in order to bring air into the lower half of your lungs. As the upper halves of your lungs begin to fill with air, your chest begins to rise and your stomach begins to lower. Don't tire yourself. Continue for 10 breaths. The exhalation will be longer than the inhalation. measuring your breath by your footsteps. Walk slowly and leisurely in a garden, along a river, or on a village path. Breathe normally. Determine the length of your breath, the exhalation and the inhalation by the number of your footsteps. Continue for a few minutes. Begin to lengthen your exhalation by one step. Do not force a longer inhalation. Let it be natural. Watch your inhalation carefully to see if there is a desire to lengthen it. Continue for 10 breaths. Now, lengthen the exhalation by one more footstep. Watch to see whether the inhalation also lengthens by one step or not. After 10 to 20 breaths, exercises in mindfulness. Here are a number of meditation exercises which I often have used. Select the ones you like best. Although these exercises are relatively easy, they form the foundation upon which everything else is built. Half smile when you first wake up in the morning. Hang a sign or symbol such as a branch or the word "smile" on your wall so that you see it when you first wake up. This will serve as your reminder. Use the seconds before you get out of bed to take hold of your breath. Inhale and exhale 3 breaths gently while maintaining the half smile. Follow your breaths. Half smile during your free moments. Anywhere you find yourself sitting or standing, half smile. Look at a child, a leaf, a painting on the wall, anything which is relatively still, and smile. Inhale and exhale quietly 3 times. Maintain the half smile and consider the spot of your attention as your own true nature. Half smile while listening to music. Listen to a piece of music for 2 or 3 minutes. Pay attention to the words, music, rhythm, and sentiments. Smile while watching your inhalations and exhalations. Half smile when irritated. When you realize you're irritated, half smile at once. Inhale and exhale quietly, maintaining the half smile for 3 breaths. Letting go in a lying down position. Lie on your back on a flat surface without a mattress or pillow. Keep your arms loosely by your sides and your legs slightly apart, stretched out before you. Maintain a half smile. Breathe in and out gently, keeping your attention focused on your breath. Relax each muscle of your body as though it were sinking down through the floor. Let go entirely, keeping your attention only on your breath and half smile. Think of yourself as a cat relaxed before a warm fire, whose muscles yield without resistance to anyone's touch. Continue for 15 breaths. Letting go in the sitting position. Sit in the half or full lotus, or cross-legged, or your 2 legs folded beneath you, or even on a chair, your 2 feet touching the floor. Half smile. Inhale and exhale while maintaining the half smile. Let go. Deep breathing. Lie on your back. Breathe evenly and gently, focusing your attention on the movement of your stomach. As you begin to breathe in, allow your stomach to rise in order to bring air into the lower half of your lungs. As the upper halves of your lungs begin to fill with air, your chest begins to rise and your stomach begins to lower. Don't tire yourself. Continue for 10 breaths. The exhalation will be longer than the inhalation. Measuring your breath by your footsteps. Walk slowly and leisurely in a garden, along a river, or on a village path. Breathe normally. Determine the length of your breath, the exhalation and the inhalation by the number of your footsteps. Continue for a few minutes. Begin to lengthen your exhalation by 1 step. Do not force a longer inhalation. Let it be natural. Watch your inhalation carefully to see if there is a desire to lengthen it. Continue for 10 breaths. Now, lengthen the exhalation by 1 more footstep. Watch to see whether the inhalation also lengthens by 1 step or not. After 10 to 20 breaths, return your breath to normal. About 5 minutes later, you can begin the practice of lengthened breaths again. When you feel the least bit tired, return to normal. After several sessions of the practice of lengthened breath, your exhalation and inhalation will grow equal in length. Counting your breath. Sit in the half or full lotus or take a walk. As you inhale, be mindful that I am inhaling 1. When you exhale, be mindful that I am exhaling 1. Remember to breathe from the stomach. When beginning the second inhalation, be mindful that I am inhaling 2. And slowly exhaling, be mindful that I am exhaling 2. After you have reached 10, return to 1. Whenever you lose count, return to 1. Following your breath while listening to music. Listen to a piece of music. Breathe long, light, and even breaths. Follow your breath while remaining aware of the movement and sentiments of the music. Do not get lost in the music, but continue to be master of your breath and yourself. Following your breath while carrying on a conversation. Breathe long, light, and even breaths. Follow your breath while listening to a friend's words and to your own replies. Continue as with the music. Following the breath. Sit in a full or half lotus or go for a walk. Begin to inhale gently and normally from the stomach, mindful that I am inhaling normally. Exhale in mindfulness. I am exhaling normally. Continue for 3 breaths. On the 4th breath, extend the inhalation, mindful that I am breathing in a long inhalation. Exhale in mindfulness. I am breathing out a long exhalation. Continue for 3 breaths. Now, follow your breath carefully, aware of every movement of your stomach and lungs. Follow the entrance and exit of air. Be mindful that I am inhaling and following the inhalation from its beginning to its end. I am exhaling and following the exhalation from its beginning to its end. Continue for 20 breaths. Return to normal. After 5 minutes, repeat the exercise. Remember to maintain the half smile while breathing. Once you have mastered this exercise, move on to the next. Mindfulness of the positions of the body. This can be practiced in any time and place. Begin to focus your attention on your breath. Breathe quietly and more deeply than usual. Be mindful of the position of your body, whether you are walking, standing, lying, or sitting down. Be mindful of the purpose of your position. For example, you might be conscious that you are standing on a green hillside in order to refresh yourself. If there is no purpose, be mindful that there is no purpose. Mindfulness while making tea. Prepare a pot of tea to serve a guest or to drink by yourself. Do each movement slowly. Do not let one detail of your movements go by without being mindful of it. Breathe gently and more deeply than usual. Take hold of your breath if your mind strays. Washing the dishes. Wash the dishes relaxingly, as though each bowl were an object of sacred contemplation. Follow your breath to prevent your mind from straying. Do not try to hurry to get the job over with. Washing the dishes is meditation. If you cannot wash the dishes in mindfulness, neither can you meditate while sitting in silence. Washing clothes. Do not wash too many clothes at one time. Select only 3 or 4 articles of clothing. Find the most comfortable position to sit or stand so as to prevent a backache. Scrub the clothes relaxingly. Hold your attention on every movement of your hands and arms. Pay attention to the soap and water. When you have finished scrubbing and rinsing, your mind and body should feel as clean and fresh as your clothes. Remember to maintain the half smile and take hold of your breath whenever your mind wanders. Cleaning house. Divide your work into stages: putting away books, straightening things, scrubbing the bathroom, sweeping the floors, and dusting. Allow a good length of time for each task. Move 3 times more slowly than usual. Fully focus your attention on each task. Avoid any abrupt or harsh movement. Maintain mindfulness of the breath, especially when your thoughts wander. A slow motion bath. Allow yourself 30 to 45 minutes to take a bath. From the moment you prepare the bath water to the moment you put on clean clothes, let every motion be light and slow. Be attentive of every movement. Place your attention to every part of your body without discrimination or fear. Be mindful of the water on your body. By the time you've finished, Your mind should feel as peaceful and light as your body. Follow your breath. Think of yourself as being in a clean and fragrant lotus pond in the summer. The pebble. While sitting still and breathing slowly, think of yourself as a pebble falling through a clear stream. There is no intention to guide your movement. Sink toward the spot of total rest on the gentle sand of the riverbed. Continue meditating on the pebble until your mind and body are at rest. Maintain this peace and joy a half hour while watching your breath. The universe exists in this present moment. No desire can pull you away from this present peace. Know that to become a Buddha and to save all beings can only be realized on the foundation of the pure peace of the present moment. A day of mindfulness. Set aside one day of the week. Do not organize any meetings or have friends over. Do only such simple work as house cleaning, cooking, washing clothes, and dusting. Once the house is neat and clean, and all your things are in order, take a slow motion bath. Afterwards, prepare and drink tea. You might read scripture or write letters to close friends. Afterwards, take a walk to practice breathing. While reading scripture or writing letters, maintain your mindfulness. Don't let the text or letter pull you away somewhere else. In the evening, prepare yourself a light meal, perhaps only a little fruit or a glass of fruit juice. Sit in meditation for an hour before you go to bed. During the day, take 2 walks of a half hour to 45 minutes. Instead of reading before you go to bed, practice total relaxation for 5 to 10 minutes. Be master of your breathing. Breathe gently. The breath should not be too long. With your eyes closed, follow the rising and lowering of your stomach and chest. Every movement during this day should be at least 2 times slower than usual. Contemplation on interdependence. Find a photo of yourself as a child. Sit in the full or half lotus. Begin to follow your breath. After 20 breaths, begin to focus your attention on the photo in front of you. Recreate and live again the 5 aggregates of which you were made up at the time the photo was taken. The physical characteristics of your body, your feelings, perceptions, mind functionings, and consciousness at that age. Continue to follow your breath. Do not let your memories lure you away or overcome you. Maintain this meditation for 15 minutes. Maintain the half smile. Turn your mindfulness to your present self. See the 5 aggregates which make up yourself. Ask the question, who am I? This should not be an abstract question to consider with your discursive intellect, but should be rooted deeply within you. The 5 aggregates within you. Contemplate for 10 minutes, maintaining light but deep breath. Yourself. Sit in a dark room by yourself or anywhere where there is solitude. Take hold of your breath. Give rise to the thought, I will use my finger to point at myself, and then, instead of pointing at your body, point in the opposite direction. Contemplate seeing yourself outside of your bodily form. Contemplate seeing your bodily form in the trees, grass, or river. Be mindful that you are in the universe, and the universe is in you. If the universe is, you are. If you are, the universe is. There is no birth. There is no death. Maintain the half-smile. Take hold of your breath. Contemplate for 10 to 20 minutes. Your skeleton. Lie on a bed, on a mat, or on the grass in a comfortable position. Don't use a pillow. Take hold of your breath. Imagine all that is left of your body is a white skeleton lying on the face of the earth. Maintain the half-smile and continue to follow your breath. Imagine that all your flesh has decomposed and is gone, that your skeleton is now lying in the earth 80 years after burial. See clearly the bones of your head, back, your ribs, your hip bones, leg, and arm bones, finger bones. Maintain the half-smile. Breathe very lightly, your heart and mind serene. See that your skeleton is not you. Your bodily form is not you. Be at one with life. Live eternally in the trees and grass, in other people, in the birds and beasts, in the sky, in the ocean waves. Your skeleton is only one part of you. You are present everywhere and in every moment. Continue for 20 to 30 minutes. Your true visage before you were born. In the full or half lotus, follow your breath. Concentrate on the point of your life's beginning. A. Know that it is also the point of the beginning of your death. See that both your life and death are manifested at the same time. See that the existence of your life and death depend on each other. One is the foundation of the other. Then concentrate on the ending of the twofold manifestation, B, which is wrongly called death. See that there is no difference between A and after B. Search for your true face in the periods before A and after B. A loved one who has died. On a chair or bed, sit or lie in a position you feel comfortable in. Take hold of your breath. Contemplate the body of a loved one who has died. Know clearly that all the flesh of the person has decomposed and only a skeleton remains lying quietly beneath the earth. Know clearly that your own flesh is still here, and in yourself are still converged the 5 aggregates of bodily form, feeling, perception, mental functioning, and consciousness. Think of your interaction with that person in the past and right now. Maintain the half-smile and take hold of your breath. Contemplate this way for 15 minutes. Emptiness. Sit in the full or half lotus. Begin to regulate your breath. Contemplate the nature of emptiness in the assembly of the 5 aggregates: bodily form, feeling, perception, mind functioning, and consciousness. Pass from one aggregate to another. See that all transform, are impermanent, and without self. All obey the law of interdependence. Their coming together and disbanding from one from another resembles the gathering and vanishing of clouds around the peaks of mountains. Neither cling to nor reject the 5 aggregates. See clearly that the 5 aggregates are without self and are empty, but that they are also wondrous. See that the 5 aggregates do not undergo creation and destruction, for they themselves are ultimate reality. See that impermanence is a concept, non-self is a concept, emptiness is a concept, so that you will not become imprisoned in the concepts of impermanence, non-self, and emptiness. This exercise should be practiced only after the student has thoroughly practiced the previous 5 exercises. The amount of time will vary according to the individual, perhaps 1 hour, perhaps 2. Compassion for the person you hate or despise the most. Sit quietly. Breathe and smile the half-smile. Contemplate the image of the person who has caused you the most suffering. Regard the features you hate or despise the most, or find the most repulsive. Try to examine what makes this person happy and what causes suffering in his daily life. Contemplate the person's perceptions. Try to see what patterns of thought and reason this person follows. Examine what motivates this person's hopes and actions. Finally, consider the person's consciousness. See whether his views and insights are open and free or not, and whether or not he has been influenced by any prejudices, narrow-mindedness, hatred, or anger. See whether or not he is master of himself. Continue until you feel compassion rise in your heart like a well filling with fresh water, and your anger and resentment disappear. Practice this exercise many times on the same person. Suffering caused by the lack of wisdom. Sit in the full or half lotus. Follow your breath. Choose a person, family, or society which is suffering. This will be the object of your contemplation. In the case of a person, try to see every suffering that person is undergoing. Begin with the suffering of bodily form, sickness, poverty, physical pain. Then, proceed to the suffering caused by feelings, internal conflicts, fear, hatred, jealousy, a tortured conscience. Consider next the suffering caused by perceptions, pessimism, dwelling on problems with a dark and narrow viewpoint. See whether his mind is motivated by fear, discouragement, despair, or hatred. See whether or not his consciousness is shut off because of his situation, because of his suffering. because of people around him, his education, propaganda, or a lack of control over his own self. Meditate on all these sufferings until your heart fills with compassion, and you are able to see that the person suffers because of circumstances and ignorance. Resolve to help that person get out of his present situation through the most silent and unpretentious means possible. In the case of a family, follow the same method. Go through all the sufferings of one person, and then on to the next person, until you have examined the sufferings of the entire family. See that their sufferings are your own. See that you must help them liberate themselves from their present situation by the most silent and unpretentious means possible. In the case of a society, take the situation of a country suffering war or other injustice. See that every person involved in the conflict is a victim. See that no person, including those in warring parties, desires the suffering to continue. See that the situation exists because of ideologies and an unjust world economic system, upheld by every person through ignorance or through lack of resolve to change it. See that two sides in a conflict are not really opposing, but two aspects of the same reality. See that the most essential thing is life, and that killing or oppressing one another will not solve anything. Remember the Sutra's words. In the time of war, raise in yourself the mind of compassion. Help living beings abandon the will to fight. Wherever there is furious battle, use all your might to keep both sides' strength equal, and then step into the conflict to reconcile. Vimala Kirti Nirdesa. Meditate until hatred disappears, and compassion and love rise like a well of fresh water within you. Vow to work for awareness and reconciliation by the most silent and unpretentious means possible. Detached action. Sit in the full or half lotus. Follow your breath. Take a project you consider important as the subject of your contemplation. Examine the purpose of the work, the methods to be used, and the people involved. Consider first the purpose of the project. See that the work is to serve, to alleviate suffering, to respond to compassion, not to satisfy the desire for praise or recognition. See that the methods used encourage cooperation between humans. Don't consider the project as an act of charity. Consider the people involved. Do you still see in terms of ones who serve and ones who benefit? If you can still see who are the ones serving and who are the ones benefiting, your work is for the sake of yourself and the workers, and not for the sake of service. The Prajnaparamita Sutra says, the Bodhisattva helps row living beings to the other shore, but in fact, no living beings are being helped to the other shore. Determined to work in the spirit of detached action. Detachment. Sit in the full or half lotus. Follow your breath. Recall the most significant achievements in your life. Examine your talent, your virtue, your capacity, and the convergence of favorable conditions that have led to success. Examine the complacency and the arrogance that have arisen from the feeling that you are the main cause for such success. Shed the light of interdependence on the whole matter to see that the achievement is not really yours, but the convergence of various conditions beyond your reach. See to it that you will not be bound to these achievements. Only when you can relinquish them can you really be free and no longer be assailed by them. Recall the bitterest failures in your life and examine each of them. Examine your talent, your virtue, your capacity, and the absence of favorable conditions that led to the failures. Examine all the complexes that have arisen within you from the feeling that you are not capable of realizing success. Shed the light of interdependence on the whole matter to see that failures cannot be accounted for by your inabilities, but rather by the lack of favorable conditions. See that you have no strength to shoulder these failures, that these failures are not your own self. Only when you can relinquish them can you really be free and no longer assailed by them. Contemplation on non-abandonment. Sit in the full or half lotus. Follow your breath. Apply one of the exercises on interdependence, yourself, your skeleton, or one who has died. See that everything is impermanent. See that although things are impermanent and without lasting identity, they are nonetheless wondrous. While you are not bound by the conditioned, neither are you bound by the non-conditioned. See that the saint, although he can abandon the teaching of interdependence as if it were cold ashes, still he can dwell in it and not be drowned. Contemplate that awakened people, while not being enslaved by the work of serving living beings, never abandon their work of serving living beings. The Foundation of Mindfulness by Satipatthana Sutta, translated from the Pali by Nidana Satta. Thus have I heard. At one time, the Blessed One was living among the Kurus at Kamasadama, a market town of the Kuru people. There the Blessed One addressed the bhikkhus thus, "Monks," and they replied to him, "Venerable Sir." The Blessed One spoke as follows: "This is the only way, monks, for the purification of beings, for the overcoming of sorrow and lamentation, for the destruction of suffering and grief, for reaching the right path, for the attainment of nirvana, namely the 4 foundations of mindfulness." What are the 4? In this teaching, a monk lives contemplating the body in the body, clearly comprehending and mindful, having overcome covetousness and grief. He lives contemplating feelings in feelings, clearly comprehending and mindful, having overcome covetousness and grief. He lives contemplating consciousness in consciousness, comprehending and mindful, having overcome in this world covetousness and grief. He lives contemplating mental objects in mental objects, comprehending and mindful, having overcome in this world covetousness and grief. 1. The contemplation of the body. 1. mindfulness of breathing. And how does a monk live contemplating the body in the body? Herein, monks, a monk having gone to the forest, to the foot of a tree, or to an empty place, sits down with his legs crossed, keeps his body erect, and his mindfulness alert. Ever mindful he breathes in, and mindful he breathes out. Breathing in a long breath, he knows, I am breathing in a long breath. Breathing out a long breath, he knows, I am breathing out a long breath. Breathing in a short breath, he knows, I am breathing in a short breath. Breathing out a short breath, he knows, I am breathing out a short breath. Experiencing the whole breath body, I shall breathe in. Thus he trains himself. Experiencing the whole breath body, I shall breathe out. Thus he trains himself. Calming the activity of the breath body, I shall breathe in. Thus he trains himself. Calming the activity of the breath body, I shall breathe out. Thus he trains himself. Thus he lives, contemplating the body in the body internally. Or he lives, contemplating the body in the body internally and externally. He lives, contemplating origination factors in the body. Or he lives contemplating origination and dissolution factors in the body. Or his mindfulness is established with the thought, the body exists to the extent necessary just for knowledge and mindfulness, and he lives detached and clings to naught in the world. Note, the meditation student should repeat the contemplating the body in the body recitation or mantra after each of the following 6 contemplations of the body, as well as after each of the 9 cemetery contemplations. 2. The postures of the body. A monk knows when he is going. I am going. He knows when he is standing. I am standing. He knows when he is sitting. I am sitting. He knows when he is lying down. I am lying down. Or as his body is disposed, so he knows it. 3. Mindfulness with clear comprehension. A monk, in going forward and back, applies clear comprehension. In looking away, he applies clear comprehension. In bending and in stretching, he applies clear comprehension. In wearing robes and carrying a bowl, he applies clear comprehension. In eating, drinking, chewing, and savoring, he applies clear comprehension. In attending to the calls of nature, he applies clear comprehension. In walking, standing, sitting, in falling asleep, in waking, in speaking, and in keeping silence, he applies clear comprehension. 4. Reflection on the repulsiveness of the body. A monk reflects on his body enveloped by skin and full of manifold impurity, from the soles up, and from the top of the head down, thinking thus: there are in this body hair of the head, hair of the body, nails, teeth, skin, flesh, sinews, bones, marrow, kidneys, heart, liver, midriff, spleen, lungs, intestines, mesentery, gorge, feces, bile, phlegm, pus, blood, sweat, fat, tears, grease, saliva, nasal mucus, synovial fluid, urine. 5. Reflection on the material elements. A monk reflects on his body, however it be placed or disposed, by way of the material elements. There are in this body the element of earth, the element of water, the element of fire, the element of wind. Just as if monks, a clever cow butcher, having slaughtered a cow and divided it into portions, should be sitting at the junction of 4 high roads. In the same way, a monk reflects on his body as it is placed by way of the material elements. There are in this body the elements of earth, water, fire, and wind. The 9 Cemetery Contemplations. 1. If a monk sees a body dead 1, 2, or 3 days, swollen, blue, and festering, thrown in the charnel ground, he then applies this perception to his own body thus: Verily, also my own body is of the same nature. Such it will become, and will not escape it. Thus he lives contemplating the body, internally, or lives contemplating the body in the body, externally, or lives contemplating the body in the body, internally and externally. He lives contemplating origination factors in the body, or he lives contemplating dissolution factors in the body, or he lives contemplating origination and dissolution factors in the body, or his mindfulness is established with the thought: the body exists to the extent necessary just for knowledge and mindfulness, and he lives independent and clings to naught in the world. Thus also monks, a monk lives contemplating the body in the body. 2. If a monk sees a body thrown in the charnel ground, being eaten by crows, hawks, vultures, dogs, jackals, or worms, he then applies this perception to his own body thus: Verily, also my own body is of the same nature. Such it will become, and will not escape it. 3. If a monk sees a body thrown in the charnel ground, reduced to a skeleton, with some flesh and blood attached to it, held together by tendons. 4. If a monk sees a body thrown in the charnel ground, reduced to a skeleton, blood besmeared, and without flesh, held together by tendons. 5. If a monk sees a body thrown in the charnel ground, reduced to a skeleton without flesh and blood, held together by tendons. 6. If a monk sees a body thrown in the charnel ground, reduced to disconnected bones, scattered in all directions, here a bone of the hand, there a bone of the foot, a shin bone, a thigh bone, the pelvis, spine, and skull. 7. If a monk sees a body thrown in the charnel ground, reduced to bleached bones of conch-like color. 8. If a monk sees a body thrown in the charnel ground, reduced to bones more than a year old, lying in a heap. 9. And further, monks, if a monk sees a body thrown in the charnel ground, reduced to bones, gone rotten, and become dust, he then applies this perception to his own body thus: Verily also, my own body is of the same nature. Such it will become, and will not escape it. 2. The contemplation of feeling. And how, monks, does a monk live contemplating feelings in feelings? Herein, monks, a monk, when experiencing a pleasant feeling, knows, I experience a pleasant feeling. When experiencing a painful feeling, he knows, I experience a painful feeling. When experiencing neither a pleasant nor a painful feeling, he knows, I experience neither a pleasant nor a painful feeling. When experiencing a pleasant worldly feeling, he knows, I experience a pleasant worldly feeling. When experiencing a pleasant spiritual feeling, he knows, I experience a pleasant spiritual feeling. When experiencing a painful worldly feeling, he knows, I experience a painful worldly feeling. When experiencing a painful spiritual feeling, he knows, I experience a painful spiritual feeling. When experiencing a neither pleasant nor painful worldly feeling, he knows, I experience a neither pleasant nor painful worldly feeling. When experiencing a neither pleasant nor painful spiritual feeling, he knows, I experience a neither pleasant nor painful spiritual feeling. Thus he lives contemplating feelings in feelings internally, or he lives contemplating feelings in feelings externally, or he lives contemplating feelings in feelings internally and externally. He lives contemplating origination factors in feelings, or he lives contemplating dissolution factors in feelings, or he lives contemplating origination and dissolution factors in feelings, or his mindfulness is established with the thought, feeling exists to the extent necessary just for knowledge and mindfulness, and he lives detached and clings to naught in the world. Thus, monks, a monk lives contemplating feelings in feelings. 3. The contemplation of consciousness. And how, monks, does a monk live contemplating consciousness in consciousness? Herein, monks, A monk knows consciousness with lust, as with lust, consciousness without lust, as without lust, consciousness with hate, as with hate, consciousness without hate, as without hate, consciousness with ignorance, as with ignorance, consciousness without ignorance, as without ignorance, the shrunken state of consciousness as the shrunken state, the distracted state of consciousness as the distracted state, the developed state of consciousness as the developed state, the undeveloped state of consciousness as the undeveloped state, the state of consciousness with some other mental state superior to it, as the state with something mentally higher, the state of consciousness with no other mental state superior to it, as the state with nothing mentally higher, the concentrated state of consciousness as the concentrated state, the unconcentrated state of consciousness as the unconcentrated state, the freed state of consciousness as the freed state, and the unfreed state of consciousness as the unfreed. Thus he lives contemplating consciousness in consciousness internally, or he lives contemplating consciousness in consciousness externally, or he lives contemplating consciousness in consciousness internally and externally. He lives contemplating origination factors in consciousness, or he lives contemplating dissolution factors in consciousness, or he lives contemplating origination and dissolution factors in consciousness, or his mindfulness is established with the thought, consciousness exists to the extent necessary for knowledge and mindfulness, and he lives detached and clings to naught in the world. Thus, monks, a monk lives contemplating consciousness in consciousness. 4. The contemplation of mental objects. 1. The 5 hindrances. And how, monks, does a monk live contemplating mental objects in mental objects? Herein, monks, a monk lives contemplating mental objects in the mental objects of the 5 hindrances. How, monks, does a monk live contemplating mental objects in the mental objects of the 5 hindrances? Herein, monks, a monk, when sense desire is present, knows, there is sense desire in me. Or when sense desire is not present, he knows, there is no sense desire in me. He knows how the arising of the non-arisen sense desire comes to be. He knows how the abandoning of the arisen sense desire comes to be. And he knows how the non-arising of the abandoned sense desire in the future will come to be. When anger is present, he knows, there is anger in me. Or when anger is not present, he knows, there is no anger in me. He knows how the arising of the non-arisen anger comes to be. He knows how the abandoning of the arisen anger comes to be. And he knows how the non-arising of the abandoned anger in the future will come to be. When sloth and torpor are present, he knows, there are sloth and torpor in me. And when sloth and torpor are not present, he knows, there are no sloth and torpor in me. He knows how the arising of the non-arisen sloth and torpor comes to be. He knows how the abandoning of the arisen sloth and torpor comes to be. And he knows how the non-arising of the abandoned sloth and torpor in the future will come to be. When agitation and scruples are present, he knows there are agitation and scruples in me. Or when agitation and scruples are not present, he knows there are no agitation or scruples in me. He knows how the arising of the non-arisen agitation and scruples comes to be. He knows how the abandoning of the arisen agitation and scruples comes to be. And he knows how the non-arising of the abandoned agitation and scruples in the future will come to be. When doubt is present, he knows there is doubt in me. Or when doubt is not present, he knows there is no doubt in me. He knows how the arising of the non-arisen doubt comes to be. He knows how the abandoning of the arisen doubt comes to be. He knows how the non-arising of the abandoned doubt in the future will come to be. Thus he lives, contemplating mental objects in mental objects internally, or he lives contemplating mental objects in mental objects externally, or he lives contemplating mental objects in mental objects internally and externally. He lives contemplating origination factors in mental objects, or he lives contemplating dissolution factors in mental objects, or he lives contemplating origination and dissolution factors in mental objects, or his mindfulness is established with the thought, mental objects exist to the extent necessary for knowledge and mindfulness, and he lives detached and clings to naught in the world. 2. The 5 aggregates of clinging. A monk lives contemplating mental objects in the mental objects of the 5 aggregates of clinging. How, monks, does a monk live contemplating mental objects in the mental objects of the 5 aggregates of clinging? Herein, monks, a monk thinks. Thus is material form. Thus is the arising of material form. And thus is the disappearance of material form. Thus is feeling. Thus is the arising of feeling. Thus is the disappearance of feeling. Thus is perception. Thus is the arising of perception. Thus is the disappearance of perception. Thus are formations. Thus are the arising of formations. And thus is the disappearance of formations. Thus is consciousness. Thus is the arising of consciousness. And thus is the disappearance of consciousness. Thus he lives contemplating mental objects in mental objects internally, or he lives contemplating mental objects in mental objects externally, or he lives contemplating mental objects in mental objects internally and externally. He lives contemplating origination factors in mental objects, or he lives contemplating dissolution factors in mental objects, or he lives contemplating origination and dissolution factors in mental objects, or his mindfulness is established with the thought, mental objects exist to the extent necessary for knowledge and mindfulness, and he lives detached and clings to naught in the world. 3. The 6 internal and the 6 external sense bases. A monk lives contemplating mental objects in the mental objects of the 6 internal and the 6 external sense bases. How, monks, does a monk live contemplating mental objects in the mental objects of the 6 internal and the 6 external sense bases? Herein, monks, a monk knows the eye and visual forms, and the fetter that arises dependent on both the eye and forms. He knows how the arising of the non-arisen fetter comes to be. He knows how the abandoning of the arisen fetter comes to be, and he knows how the non-arising of the abandoned fetter in the future will come to be. He knows the ear and sounds, the nose and smells, the tongue and flavors, the body and tactile objects, the mind and mental objects, and the fetter that arises dependent on both. He knows how the abandoning of the non-arisen fetter comes to be, and he knows how the non-arising of the abandoned fetter in the future will come to be. Thus, monks, the monk lives contemplating mental objects in mental objects internally, or he lives contemplating mental objects in mental objects externally, or he lives contemplating mental objects in mental objects internally and externally. He lives contemplating origination factors in mental objects, or he lives contemplating dissolution factors in mental objects, or he lives contemplating origination and dissolution factors in mental objects, or his mindfulness is established with the thought, mental objects exist to the extent necessary for knowledge and mindfulness, and he lives detached and clings to naught in the world. 4. The 7 factors of enlightenment. A monk lives contemplating mental objects in the mental objects of the 7 factors of enlightenment. How, monks, does a monk live contemplating mental objects in the mental objects of the 7 factors of enlightenment? Herein, monks, when the enlightenment factor of mindfulness is present, the monk knows the enlightenment factor of mindfulness is in me. Or, when the enlightenment factor of mindfulness is absent, he knows the enlightenment factor of mindfulness is not in me. And he knows how the arising of the non-arisen enlightenment factor of mindfulness comes to be, and how perfection in the development of the arisen enlightenment factor of mindfulness comes to be. When the enlightenment factor of the investigation of mental objects is present, the monk knows the enlightenment factor of the investigation of mental objects is in me. When the enlightenment factor of the investigation of mental objects is absent, he knows the enlightenment factor of the investigation of mental objects is not in me. And he knows how the arising of the non-arisen enlightenment factor of the investigation of mental objects comes to be, and how perfection in the development of the arisen enlightenment factor of the investigation of mental objects comes to be. When the enlightenment factor of energy is present, he knows the enlightenment factor of energy is in me. When the enlightenment factor of energy is absent, he knows. The enlightenment factor of energy is not in me, and he knows how the arising of the non-arisen enlightenment factor of energy comes to be, and how perfection in the development of the arisen enlightenment factor of energy comes to be. When the enlightenment factor of joy is present, he knows. The enlightenment factor of joy is in me, and when the enlightenment factor of joy is absent, he knows. The enlightenment factor of joy is not in me, and he knows how the arising of the non-arisen enlightenment factor of joy comes to be, and how perfection in the development of the arisen enlightenment factor of joy comes to be. When the enlightenment factor of tranquility is present, he knows. The enlightenment factor of tranquility is in me. When the enlightenment factor of tranquility is absent, he knows. The enlightenment factor of tranquility is not in me, and he knows how the arising of the non-arisen enlightenment factor of tranquility comes to be, and how perfection in the development of the arisen enlightenment factor of tranquility comes to be. When the enlightenment factor of concentration is present, he knows. The enlightenment factor of concentration is in me. When the enlightenment factor of concentration is absent, he knows. The enlightenment factor of concentration is not in me, and he knows how the arising of the non-arisen enlightenment factor of concentration comes to be, and how perfection in the development of the arisen enlightenment factor of concentration comes to be. When the enlightenment factor of equanimity is present, he knows. The enlightenment factor of equanimity is in me. When the enlightenment factor of equanimity is absent, he knows. The enlightening factor of equanimity is not in me, and he knows how the arising of the non-arisen enlightenment factor of equanimity comes to be, and how perfection in the development of the arisen enlightenment factor of equanimity comes to be. Thus he lives, contemplating mental objects in mental objects internally, or he lives contemplating mental objects in mental objects externally, or he lives contemplating mental objects in mental objects internally and externally. He lives contemplating origination factors in mental objects, or he lives contemplating dissolution factors in mental objects, or he lives contemplating origination and dissolution factors in mental objects, or his mindfulness is established with the thought, mental objects exist to the extent necessary for knowledge and mindfulness, and he lives detached and clings to naught in the world. 5. The Four Noble Truths. And further, monks, a monk lives contemplating mental objects in the mental objects of the Four Noble Truths. How, monks, does a monk live contemplating mental objects in the mental objects of the Four Noble Truths? Herein, monks, a monk knows. This is suffering, according to reality. He knows. This is the origin of suffering, according to reality. He knows. This is the cessation of suffering, according to reality. He knows. This is the road leading to the cessation of suffering, according to reality. Thus he lives, contemplating mental objects in mental objects internally, or he lives contemplating mental objects in mental objects externally, or he lives contemplating mental objects in mental objects internally and externally. He lives contemplating origination factors in mental objects, or he lives contemplating dissolution factors in mental objects, or he lives contemplating origination and dissolution factors in mental objects, or his mindfulness is established with the thought, mental objects exist, to the extent necessary for knowledge and mindfulness, and he lives detached and clings to naught in the world. Thus, monks, a monk lives contemplating mental objects in the mental objects of the Four Noble Truths. Verily, monks, whosoever practices these four foundations of mindfulness in this manner for 7 years, one of these two fruits may be expected of him: highest knowledge, or arhatship, here and now, or in some remainder of clinging is yet present, the state of non-returning. O monks, let alone 7 years. Should any person practicing these four foundations of mindfulness in this manner for 6 years, for 5 years, 4 years, 3 years, 2 years, 1 year, then one of these two fruits may be expected by him: highest knowledge, here and now, or if some remainder of clinging is yet present, the state of non-returning. O monks, let alone a year. Should any person practice these four foundations of mindfulness in this manner for 7 months, for 6 months, 5 months, 4 months, 3 months, 2 months, a month, half a month, then one of these two fruits may be expected by him: highest knowledge, here and now, or if some remainder of clinging is yet present, the state of non-returning. O monks, let alone half a month. Should any person practice these four foundations of mindfulness in this manner for a week, then one of these two fruits may be expected by him: highest knowledge, here and now, or if some remainder of clinging is yet present, the state of non-returning. Because of this it is said, this is the only way, monks, for the purification of beings, for the overcoming of sorrow and lamentation, for the destruction of suffering and grief, for reaching the right path, for the attainment of nirvana, namely, the four foundations of mindfulness. Thus spoke the Blessed One. Satisfied, the monks approved of his words. 1. The first tetrad, contemplation of the body. 1. Breathing in a long breath, he knows, I breathe in a long breath. Breathing out a long breath, he knows, I breathe out a long breath. 2. Breathing in a short breath, he knows, I breathe in a short breath. Breathing out a short breath, he knows, I breathe out a short breath. 3. Experiencing the whole breath body, I shall breathe in. Thus he trains himself, experiencing the whole breath body I shall breathe out. Thus he trains himself. 4. Calming the bodily function of breathing, I shall breathe in. Thus he trains himself. Calming the body function of breathing, I shall breathe out. Thus he trains himself. 2. The second tetrad, contemplation of feelings. 5. Experiencing rapture, I shall breathe in. Thus he trains himself. Experiencing rapture, I shall breathe out. Thus he trains himself. 6. Experiencing happiness, I shall breathe in. Thus he trains himself. Experiencing happiness, I shall breathe out. Thus he trains himself. 7. Experiencing the mental functions, I shall breathe in. Thus he trains himself. Experiencing the mental functions, I shall breathe out. Thus he trains himself. 8. Calming the mental functions, I shall breathe in. Thus he trains himself. Calming the mental functions, I shall breathe out. Thus he trains himself. 3. The third tetrad, contemplation of the mind. 9. Experiencing the mind, I shall breathe in. Thus he trains himself. Experiencing the mind, I shall breathe out. Thus he trains himself. 10. Gladdening the mind, I shall breathe in. Thus he trains himself. Gladdening the mind, I shall breathe out. Thus he trains himself. 11. Concentrating the mind, I shall breathe in. Thus he trains himself. Concentrating the mind, I shall breathe out. Thus he trains himself. 12. Liberating the mind, I shall breathe in. Thus he trains himself. Liberating the mind, I shall breathe out. Thus he trains himself. 4th. The fourth tetrad, contemplation of mind objects. 13. Contemplating impermanence, I shall breathe in. Thus he trains himself. Contemplating impermanence, I shall breathe out. Thus he trains himself. 14. Contemplating dispassion, I shall breathe in. Thus he trains himself. Contemplating dispassion, I shall breathe out. Thus he trains himself. 15. Contemplating cessation, I shall breathe in. Thus he trains himself. Contemplating cessation, I shall breathe out. Thus he trains himself. 16. Contemplating relinquishment, I shall breathe in. Thus he trains himself. Contemplating relinquishment, I shall breathe out. Thus he trains himself. 17. In that way, cultivated and regularly practiced, monks' mindfulness of breathing brings great fruit and benefit. Perfecting the foundations of mindfulness. And how cultivated, how regularly practiced brings mindfulness of breathing the four foundations of mindfulness to perfection. 1. Whenever a monk mindfully breathes in and out a long breath or a short breath, or when he trains himself to breathe in and out while experiencing the bodily function of breathing, or while calming that function, at that time, monks, he dwells practicing body contemplation on the body, ardent, dearly comprehending and mindful, having overcome covetousness and grief concerning the world. For breathing in and out, monks, I say, is one of the bodily processes. 2. Whenever the monk trains himself to breathe in and out while experiencing rapture, or while experiencing happiness, or while experiencing the mental functions, or while calming the mental functions, at those times, monks, he dwells practicing feeling contemplation on feelings, ardent, clearly comprehending and mindful, having overcome covetousness and grief concerning the world. For the full attention to breathing in and out, I say, is one of the feelings. 3. Whenever a monk trains himself to breathe in and out while experiencing the mind, or while gladdening the mind, or while concentrating the mind, or while liberating the mind, at that time he dwells practicing mind contemplation on the mind, ardent, clearly comprehending and mindful, having overcome covetousness and grief concerning the world. For one who lacks mindfulness and clear comprehension, I say, cannot develop mindfulness of breathing. 4. Whenever a monk trains himself to breathe in and out while contemplating impermanence, dispassion, cessation, or relinquishment, at that time he dwells practicing mind-object contemplation on mind objects, ardent, clearly comprehending and mindful, having overcome covetousness and grief concerning the world. Having wisely seen the abandoning of covetousness and grief, he looks on with perfect equanimity. Mindfulness of breathing, monks, in that way cultivated and regularly practiced, brings the 4 foundations of mindfulness to perfection. And how do the 4 foundations cultivated and regularly practiced bring the 7 factors of enlightenment to perfection? Whenever a monk dwells in the contemplation of body, feelings, mind, and mind objects, ardent, clearly comprehending and mindful, having overcome covetousness and grief concerning the world, unclouded mindfulness becomes established in him. And when unclouded mindfulness is established in him, at that time the enlightenment factor, mindfulness, is initiated in the monk, and the monk develops the enlightenment factor, mindfulness. At that time, he gains perfection in the development of the enlightenment factor, mindfulness. Dwelling mindful in that manner, he wisely investigates, examines, and scrutinizes the respective object, and while doing so, the enlightenment factor investigation of reality is initiated in the monk. At that time, the monk develops the enlightenment factor, investigation of reality. At that time, he gains perfection in the development of the enlightenment factor, investigation of reality. While he wisely investigates, examines, and scrutinizes that object, unremitting energy is initiated in him. And when the unremitting factor energy is initiated in him, the monk develops the enlightenment factor energy. At that time, he gains perfection in the development of the enlightenment factor, energy. In him possessed of energy, unworldly rapture arises, and when in a monk possessed of energy unworldly rapture arises, at that time the enlightenment factor rapture is initiated in him. The monk develops the enlightenment factor rapture. The monk gains perfection in the development of the enlightenment factor rapture. The body and mind of one who is filled with rapture become tranquil. And when the body and mind of one who is filled with rapture become tranquil, the enlightenment factor tranquility is initiated in him. At that time, the monk develops the enlightenment factor tranquility. The mind of one who is tranquil and happy becomes concentrated, and when the mind of a monk who is tranquil and happy becomes concentrated, at that time the enlightenment factor concentration is initiated in him. The monk develops the enlightenment factor concentration. He gains perfection in the development of the enlightenment factor concentration. On the mind thus concentrated, he looks with perfect equanimity, and when looking on his concentrated mind with perfect equanimity, the enlightenment factor equanimity is initiated in him. At that time, the monk develops the enlightenment factor equanimity. He gains perfection in the development of the enlightenment factor equanimity. The four foundations of mindfulness in that way cultivated and regularly practiced bring the 7 factors of enlightenment to perfection. And how do the 7 factors of enlightenment, cultivated and regularly practiced, bring wisdom and deliverance to perfection? Herein, monks, a monk develops the enlightenment factors: mindfulness, investigation of reality, energy, rapture, tranquility, concentration, and equanimity, based on detachment, dispassion, and cessation, resulting in relinquishment. The 7 factors of enlightenment, in that way cultivated and regularly practiced, bring wisdom and deliverance to perfection. Thus spoke the Exalted One. Glad in heart, the monks rejoiced in the words of the Blessed One.